Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 7th of November 2019, yeah, I know the day of the week, I'm not crazy, we're starting to look at the fourth television story for Peter Davison, The Visitation, starting with part 1. The Visitation is actually the first script to be contributed by Eric Saward, who sort of is the script editor for parts of this season and not. But this was actually the second story film, so it was before he officially took over the script editing position with I believe with Kinda, which was of course the third story filmed. They filmed the Fifth Doctor's first 4 stories right out of order, and it's very confusing. But yeah, Eric Saward wrote the script for The Visitation, and The Visitation is basically the idea here is the Doctor's trying to get Tegan back to Heathrow, but they actually land in like the 1700s, where a mysterious comet that wasn't supposed to land is, and a bunch of villagers are scared of the plague and running people away. And there's a manor that's basically empty. And plot-wise, actually, The Visitation starts with a lot of intrigue. It's weird. Eric Saward does this very odd thing of starting his episode with these 3 characters, with these three characters who only get one scene. They're basically like the lords in the manor. And the star falls, and then they slowly, their house gets invaded. It plays out kind of like a mini horror film, almost, with just like their home being invaded by basically by aliens. Though you don't know that technically at the first beginning, and then they don't get. And you see them fight off, and then we cut to black, which is kind of an awkward transition. The introductory sequence, honestly, goes on for far too long. It's just a really long sequence, and a sequence that it drags so much that you could have done a lot more with the time allotted. You could have had more of the characters. More of the characters interacting. You could have gotten the story further along than they did, because I'm going to be honest, the cliffhanger here is the opening sequence and the cliffhanger are the weakest elements. The cliffhanger is there's this wall on some stairs that, like, in a place where there probably shouldn't be a wall, which, intriguing. Nyssa goes to find Adric, Tegan, and this character Richard Mace, who I will talk about, and then surprise, the Doctor's gone, and then, oh no, someone locks them in? Like, that's the cliffhanger. That's not like, it's not like, oh, they're being gassed. It's like, oh no, they're locked in. If they were stuck there and started to starve, maybe that would be a better cliffhanger, that there's actually danger. But like they've got time to get out of it. This isn't all that effective of a cliffhanger. But I will say the story itself does start off decently. It's a nice. There's plenty of intrigue. There's plenty of nice character moments here. The opening scenes in the TARDIS, well, I usually find a lot of them to be kind of tedious and overly long. This one's actually really nice. It's nice to sort of build these nice character moments of Tegan subtly, kind of trying to build up the, like, maybe I don't really want to leave. Maybe I enjoy traveling with the Doctor more than I have been letting on. It's a really nice little character moment where it's like, yeah, maybe I'll stay on. Who knows? And that is genuinely, it's a lot of fun to see that. And then you have the character of Richard Mace, who is this actor turned highwayman who is just delightful. He's like a complete coward. He's kind of going for his own game, but he's a very, very much a colorful character. And for the most part, this episode is really just confined to these 5 characters, sort of exploring the mystery this of this little of this village which has been apparently ravaged by plague, and just villagers who are just kind of terrible people and terribly mean, with nothing really being too much of an overt villainy until I guess the end. You do see the an android, which is this. It's very 1980s. It's this very glittery monstrosity with this white face and these like checkered sleeves of like red and blue, and it's like full of glitter. It's a weird design, I'll be honest. At the very beginning, but outside of that, this first episode kind of plays like a pure historical, with with stuff components from a spaceship like power packs and a specific metal that's not found on Earth. Being clues, and it's sort of like just the characters trying to unravel the mystery. And that being said, this being actually the second story filmed, Fort of Doomsday was the first story filmed. I had a lot of issues there with just the cast not having a lot of chemistry. And oddly enough, even just for the second story being filmed, there's a decent amount of fun chemistry here. The characters really do get along, and they seem to actually. They at least partially enjoy each other's company. You can kind of feel that they've been traveling for longer than they technically have. They've really only been working together on one story. This is their second one, and you have some nice little bits of banter. I will say it is quite funny that you have the classic, I guess the quote unquote classic companion trips and hurts their ankle. And it's not one of the girls. It's Adric. I guess kind of subverting expectations, but also because he can heal himself. He basically has magic healing powers because he's an Alzarian and he's from E-space. He's completely from a different dimension. He's allowed to heal himself, but so it's that's a nice little sort of subversion of just the tropes, and overall the Visitation Part 1 it's a good start. You can kind of tell this is someone's first Doctor Who script. It's the first script that Eric Saward submitted that actually was allowed to be produced for Doctor Who. And there are definitely moments where you can kind of tell that, he's a little rough around the edges still, but overall for the first episode, it sets up a mystery, it does some nice character work, and it's just a pretty solid story. So I'm going to give The Visitation Part 1 a 7 out of 10. Alright, it's the 8th of November 2019. I just finished watching Part 2 of The Visitation. I'm going to be honest about this story. This is a story that I don't know how I feel about. I seem to feel different every time I watch it. Sometimes I'm more positive, sometimes I'm more negative. This might be more of a positive time. At least for these first 2 episodes. The first episode is definitely flawed, and I most definitely, I don't necessarily, I've never really enjoyed everything about this story. It's kind of a little bit of, it's kind of Standard Who fare, but not really Standard Who fare in many ways. It's very odd, just that you have a story like this. I will say, Part 2's cliffhanger leagues better than Part 1's cliffhanger. Part 1's cliffhanger was just a bit of a train wreck, wasn't it? Really, you're doing he's gonna get his head chopped off. That's your thing. It's a very it's a very weird sort of it's a very weird sort of story where you kind of you kind of get this standard Doctor Who thing. This first half, including this episode, seems to be a lot of trying to get down to the bottom of what's going on in this village. Like a lot of it is dealing with the ideas of, the main ideas of the characters. Basically, basically, you know, basically building up towards a sort of conclusion and building up towards a, and building up towards what the story is sort of meant to be. There's such a there's a very much a good story in here, and a lot of stuff here, but I don't know if we get any of the answers soon enough, and that's kind of the one thing that does bring this episode down a bit. I will say, Eric Saward creates a great villain. If it weren't for the fact that you see the glitter android in part 1, the reveal here with the android dressed as the Grim Reaper could have been amazing. It's one of those things where you have one of those specific stories. It's one of those stories where you have just this this sense of just about just like trying to be a big reveal but not working, because this is one of those but really, it's one of those really, really solid, it's one of those things where the reveal it doesn't work as well as perhaps it could. What does work nicely is that, is that the story itself does it does a really good job of sort of making the villain interesting. You have the main villain of this story being pteroleptals, which are basically space turtles. So we've had space frogs, space snakes, space turtles. Next time we're going to be probably getting space lizards. With seriously, this sort of seems to be just a reptilian theme to the villains this season, which I think is quite funny. But the pteroleptals are good. The idea is that this is actually a prison ship that was the escape pod, and a lot of it is running away. A lot of the episode is just running away from villagers and just unraveling the mystery. And it shouldn't work. It really shouldn't, but it kind of does. It does manage to be a solid 25 minutes of television, and a solid 25 minutes of entertainment with, where everything builds up and, comes to a decent enough story. And you really see what the story can succeed at, and I think it does a good enough job. It tells enough of the plot that you get the sense that everything is built up to something. You have the characters. The characters really do get a good chance to show off who they are and what what they mean. Um, it's overall a solid episode. Adric and Tegan are kind of captured for the entire episode, so you do have a little bit of that issue of being in just sort of having, obviously, the issues of having the crowded TARDIS, as it's commonly referred to, because yeah, Nyssa and it's Nyssa, the Doctor, and Mace for most of this, while Tegan and Adric are kind of captured. I will say Richard Mace is a fun character. He essentially gets all the best lines, and he gets. Yeah, he basically gets, to be the best aspect of this story. There's this amazing moment where they're running through the woods where he sounds like, I shan't move a moment longer. And or at the beginning, he's just looking for the wine. And Adam's like, well, what's that taste like? Oh, nectar, my boy, nectar. It's like, well, what's nectar taste like? Oh. There's just some really sparkling humor in Eric Saward's script. He knows how to create a charming character in Richard Mace, which is actually quite enjoyable. It's always fun to have these sort of charming types of characters added into Doctor Who. It's always a nice surprise. And I will say, Visitation Part 2 was probably an improvement over Part 1. It's definitely better. It's still got some flaws, and you can still kind of tell this is a first script. But it's, introduces a fun villain. The android's fun, and a lot of the plot is fun. So overall, I'm going to give The Visitation Part 2 an 8 out of 10. Alright, it's the 8th of November 2019. I just finished watching Part 3 of The Visitation. Now, Part 3 of The Visitation is... It's okay. I think it's the weakest episode thus far. And not for any bad reasons. I mean, there's some really good stuff here. But there's a big problem, and that is that it's a very slow script, and I don't think that as a script it works. Just the speed at which it works isn't good enough. It doesn't work well doing this slow plodding. Look at us, we're doing something very, 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 very slow moving and very, very very, very, kind of slow. Like, it's a lot of the Doctor and company being captured and then released and then captured again and then released again. And I'm going to be honest, it doesn't quite work for me, like perhaps it should. It's very much that the characters are kind of trying to do that you're trying to have, this slow enough build, and just overall the characters becoming, better at being with each other. But it doesn't. I just don't think it works very well. Just the slowness. It's still a good episode. There's still some great stuff. Like, this is the episode where you get a lot of backstory on the Tractators, and I will say, Eric Saward does an excellent job at bringing just Tractator. I keep calling them Tractators. That's Frontios. They're Pteroleptals. This is where I'm at. Pteroleptal Society to the forefront. There's this idea of the Pteroleptals being this honorable race who value beauty and art, but also they also are a warlike race, which I think is just kind of fascinating. Like, you have just this sort of dichotomy of, a race that is obsessive with war and very much trying to. It's like, yes, we are in charge. We have the power. We are a race conquering the galaxy. But also we like art. And the Doctor and the Pteroleptals confrontation in this episode is great. It's really well done, and it's a great performance from Peter Davison. I think probably one of the first. Well, again, it's one of the first really solid performances from Peter Davison overall. Like, he really gets to show a bit of his stuff here, because he basically there's this great dialogue. It's like, well, from the leader of the Pteroleptals, well, the humans are just like this. So, and the Doctor responds, all basically responds, "They're still primitive. What's your excuse?" This amazing condemnation of sort of just how you can have why like how can you like just sort of the idea that a primitive society somehow has all these ideas together, and it's fascinating. And I think that Peter Davison really does enjoy this material, even if the episode isn't perfect. It isn't a great episode. It does have some really good things about it. Like, you also have just the idea that this pteroleptil is a war criminal, and Peter Davison does one of his sort of defining moments here is that he offers to take the pteroleptil away to its own planet, let it live out its life. But like the pteroleptil is it being the villain doesn't want that. It wants it wants to conquer it wants to get off the earth, conquer and try to take back its right, and basically take revenge on its race. He was a criminal. That's why he's so scarred, and it's and sort of feel like he ended up escaping in an escape pod from a prison ship and getting to Earth. And now his plan is basically he's going to wipe out the human race using the plague, using the Black Death. And that's cliffhanger is he gets Tegan under his sort of hypnotic, Tegan and Richard Mace under his hypnotic control, and he basically captures the Doctor, destroys the sonic screwdriver. So yeah, no more sonic screwdriver, which I think is actually a pretty decent decision on John Nathan Turner's part. It still is kind of overused just a little bit. It is kind of just an easy out for the characters, and an easy thing for it's like, yeah, surprise, sonic screwdriver is it has been destroyed, which is it's like you're killing an old friend, which I think is quite fascinating. The Doctor does a really good job of sort of showing who he is here, and it's really it's actually really a really solid sort of thing. That's what's going on. I will say, one of the big problems with the story, especially this episode, there are a lot of sequences of just not much happening, of people just walking and going places, and the direction isn't really good at, it isn't good at setting it up well and making it yeah, here's a real bit of, here's a real bit of, of one of those things where you really get a sort of thing. It's not, it's not really a complete, it's not really, a complete story. And Tegan has nothing to do. Nyssa and Adric spend their time in the TARDIS just sort of doing nothing. The companions just feel superfluous here. Tegan is sort of basically just damseled, which is kind of a shame. It's not really it's not really a full sort of story. It's just a weird sort of ending for the story. It's it's not the absolute best. It's good. It has some great lines and some really good character dynamics, but outside of that, it's pretty okay. So overall, I'm gonna give the Visitation part 3 a 6 out of 10. Okay, it's the 9th of November, 2019. I just finished watching part 4 of The Visitation, which is obviously the concluding episode of the story, and an episode that actually, the third episode was the weakest. that's what I'll say. It's, the third episode was an episode where it's like, you really don't get, the full conclusion. You don't get the full context. It doesn't really do much. But this episode is much more, is more enjoyable, just due to the fact that it's an episode that, kind of builds up from a bunch of characters having, it builds up to the conclusion, and how sort of it's the first episode. It's an episode where the historical context of this being a story, basically this being a story set in the 1600s, specifically 1666, sort of works out and develops the story, if that makes sense. This is a story that has to develop mainly because of the fact that this is a story. This is a story about a bunch of characters who. This is a story that builds up and ends to the. It ends with the characters. It ends with the with the characters really building up to a conclusion about just how everything kind of comes to basically an end with the Pteroleptals going to London, and the Doctor accidentally starting the Great Fire of London. Like, technically the Pteroleptals win, they do get their plague released, but the Great Fire of London kind of burns out all the rats and makes just all their efforts ineffective. That's the way this story concludes. And honestly, the way it concludes is really dark, because this is a story where the characters, who this is a story where the story ends with the Doctor leaving all these characters essentially to die. They're like, they all end up dead by the end of this story, which I think is just fascinating. It's a bunch of characters who end up in this position to be basically killed. They basically die, and Richard Mace calls people to try to actually fight the fire. Ending kind of on a sour note, but I think that actually really works for the story. It definitely works when you realize that when it sort of builds up the idea of the Doctor starting something, and it's something that kind of is actually going to follow him around quite a bit in future stories. You started the Great Fire of London. This was kind of your fault, which I think is fascinating, and a really good. And it's a good way of ending the story, with those characters, and with just this big build up to a conclusion that is genuinely solid. It's a solid conclusion and a solid way of ending the story. This is also one you figure out that when this has been building, that's how they destroy the android. That actually has a purpose, so it's a decent payoff. Though I still think you could probably have cut it without losing much of the story. Like, it's okay, but yeah, it's one where you feel like, no, this is one where you definitely could have seen the story build up a little more and a little bit better. on sort of why things are doing this and why, you know, everything works this way. And yeah, but it's still kind of, overall as a story, it is still very highly flawed. This isn't the perfect story, and it's most definitely just a story that you kind of have to watch. It's fun. You know, the characters are good villains, and it leaves on a good note. So overall, I'm going to give The Visitation Part 4 a 7 out of 10. And that being said, of course, we add up the scores and average them out to give The Visitation a final score of 7 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, once again for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And join me next time when we take a look at we actually start one of 2 trilogies from Big Finish's main range, featuring the Season 19 TARDIS crew, with Andrew Smith's The Starmen. Or is it The Starman? One of the two. It is Men or Men, I'm not sure. But yeah, I'll see you then.